For decades now, modern-day prophecy writers have been claiming that the increase in severity of earthquakes are sure indicators that the rapture is near. Are they right? With what's going on around Europe right now with the volcanic ash coming from an Icelandic volcano, which many would say was very much like an earthquake, again, the prophecy writers are feverishly trying to make the claim that this is an indication of signs leading up to the rapture that is, they say, is near. And other earthquakes around the world have also been used as evidence that the end might be near, not the end so much as the rapture. And we have to keep in mind that, especially if you're a dispensationalist, that there are no signs prior to the rapture. I know this may come as a shock to so many people because so many dispensationalists write books saying Israel became a nation again in 1948. That's certainly a sign. Earthquakes and famines and wars, that these are all, and false religions, corruption in the church, that these are all indicators that the rapture must be right around the corner. Well, if you go back and you actually study what prophecy writers have written, and I have done a detailed study of this. This will be out in a book that I've written for the debate that I'm doing with Jim Fletcher, June 19th at Midway Presbyterian Church. Prophecy writers, dispensational prophecy writers have said that the rapture is a signless event, that there are no signs that you can point to, because it is the dispensationalist belief that the rapture could occur at any moment. And the rapture could have occurred in 1948, it could have occurred in 1900, it could have occurred in 1776, it could have occurred in 1066, it could have occurred in AD 70, it could have happened any time during the history of the so-called church age. Which means that if today's signs are an indication that the rapture is near, and earthquakes and volcanoes and wars and Israel becoming a nation again are the signs leading up to the rapture, and those things weren't in place in years past, therefore the rapture couldn't have been near back then, which then destroys the whole idea of the rapture becoming at any moment and it being a signless event. So from a dispensational perspective, nothing that's happening today is a sign of anything, because the dispensationalists will continually say the rapture could occur at any moment and there are no signs leading up to it. So why then do the dispensationalists say that the rapture is a signless event, and then on the other hand write books telling about how all these signs are an indication that the rapture is near? Well, I think it's quite evident. You can't sell books if you can't predict in some general way that some prophetic event is on the horizon. And that's exactly what's happened over the years. While these guys on the one hand will say it's a silence event and there is no evidence of any signs leading up to the rapture because the rapture is always imminent, and at the same time they write chapters about all the signs leading up to the rapture. They say it's setting the stage for the rapture. Well, again, if the stage is being set for the rapture today, it wasn't being set for the rapture 200 years ago or 400 years ago or 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago. And therefore, the rapture could not have been imminent or at any moment back in those days. And so it destroys the whole scenario. So there's a great deal of contradiction within the dispensational movement. And I'm not going to go into all the details of this on this show. I'm saving it for this book that I'm working on and for the debate that I'm doing with Jim Fletcher. This is a very important point. In fact, I'm kind of tipping my hand as to how I'm going to argue, make some of my argument about is modern-day Israel a fulfillment of Bible prophecy. You would be shocked at some of the statements that dispensationalists have used about that particular issue. But what about, how do we look at what's happening today around the world? Is there some sort of new indication? Is there a greater number of earthquakes happening today? Is this volcano in Iceland something new and unique? Is its effect unique on the world? Of course, 100 or more years ago, we didn't have airplane travel, and so it is affecting airplane travel. But again, that is something new to our technological age. But these are the types of things that we have to understand. Now, some people will turn to a passage like Luke chapter 21, verse 11. It says, "And there will be great earthquakes in various places, plagues and famines, and there will be terrors and great signs from heaven." Again, the Olivet Discourse describes events not in our day, but in that particular generation. Luke ends this section of Scripture with, "This generation will not pass away until all these things take place." There were earthquakes, there were famines during that period of history. Read Acts chapter 11, it says there was a famine all over the Roman Empire during that period of time. There were earthquakes during that period. I don't know if I can find the description of these in here, but if you look at my book, Last Days Madness, you will see this. Here's something Henry Alford wrote. He says, "The principal earthquakes occurring between this prophecy and the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70 were, there's one in Crete, he mentions, one at Rome on the day when Nero assumed the manly toga in AD 51, one in Phrygia, mentioned by Tacitus in AD 53, one at Laodicea in AD 60, Campania, Seneca in the year 1858. It goes on and on and on. So earthquakes were common to that particular area, and they came in bunches in that area. And because Jesus said this generation will not pass away until all these things take place, we know that Jesus was referring to earthquakes during that period of time. Because there have been earthquakes all the way through the history of the world, and some extremely, extremely powerful earthquakes that have killed the tens of thousands of people. So what we're seeing today really isn't unusual in that regard. And in fact, the Icelandic volcano that took place, it says there are 35 active volcanoes in Iceland, and one eruption has been known to set off another. The worst case happened in 1783 with an eruption lasting 8 months. The eruption killed off much of the livestock and agriculture in Iceland, which in turn caused the death of about 25% of the island's population. The eruption also eventually killed tens of thousands of people on the continent. Benjamin Franklin was in France at the time, was one of the first to connect the rapid change in local weather that collapsed European agriculture with a volcanic explosion. 1783 became known as the horrible year without summer. Europe plunged into a period of poverty that lasted for years. Some historians believe that this may have contributed to the French Revolution of 1789. So here you have 1783, an Icelandic volcano affected the weather conditions in Europe, and goes so far as to affect even weather conditions here in the United States. In North America, the winter of 1784 was the longest and one of the coldest on record. It was the longest period of below zero temperature in New England, the largest accumulation of snow in New Jersey, and the longest freezing over of the Chesapeake Bay. There was ice skating in Charleston Harbor. The huge snowstorm hit the south. The Mississippi River froze at New Orleans, and there was ice in the Gulf of Mexico. And so what we're seeing today is not really unusual. What we have going on in our society today are 4,000 earthquake measuring stations. That's something we've never had before. Plus, we also have had communication devices in order to get information to us almost immediately. Earthquakes have taken place all over the world that geologists have found, are beginning to find out, but there's never been any record of them because there have never been any eyewitnesses to those types of things. And there have never been any remote monitoring devices to tell whether something has gone off. And so we hear about an accumulation of earthquakes and we hear about the severity of them, but in reality, when you look at the history of earthquakes, you begin to see that there really isn't anything unusual about them. In terms of the Bible is very clear. Jesus was describing the earthquake signs as something as a prelude to the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. That's where we need to focus our attention. We need to get off this continued cycle of last days madness. If you want more information about this, I suggest that you get my book, Last Days Madness. You can get that at AmericanVision.com.